Good morning. Today is 20 July 2007. My name is Frank Kastner and I'm a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today, I'm here at the museum and we have the honor and privilege of interviewing Lieutenant J.G. Jim Saul. Among other things, Jim trained for carrier landings on Lake Michigan. And while that may not be the most unusual claim to fame, it's a very interesting topic for us. And we're going to talk about his training, his life before and after the military, and a lot of other things. Jim, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Look forward to hearing you.
Keep in mind that all carrier landings, all Navy landings, are terribly different than they are in any other service. Because what you do is you stall, and you literally stall out and crash because you don't have flying speed. All other landings, you land with power on the wheels, you land, you fly onto the ground.
And then you stop.
In carrier landings, you stall and bound and hit the ground and then start stopping with brakes or on carriers with cables and things like that.
So you've washed off as much speed as you possibly can.
You've lost all the speed.
Yeah.
You've lost all flying speed, and yet you keep power enough so that and you're in this position. You're in a stalled position with your nose up, hard to see. Your tail is down, so that the moment you cut off the power, you don't fly anymore. You pull off the power.
Now at that point, if something goes wrong, you can't do anything else but hit the deck.
With some airplanes, you can. You can put your power back on moments after, but it's usually it has to be before you've taken it off. But if all of a sudden you're in stall position and the landing signal officer says go around, you can block everything, which means you put all the power and you put your nose down like this so you can regain flight speed and go on. And you learn how to do that when you're flying any of these airplanes. You don't do it on a carrier, but you do it on the ground under those conditions. And when you get a little more advanced, like the next phase, when you're flying SNJs, then you have a landing signal officer. Sometimes it's teaching you how to get into those positions. But you really have to spend a lot of time to get the feeling, because a lot of flying for a naval aviator is feel. It isn't just doing it by the book but you have to learn, what does it feel like when you're in this attitude and you're just before not having any flying speed. So you learn how to do power on stalls. So you put your power on, but you keep your attitude going like this. You don't put enough power on to make you climb. You put enough power on to hold you in this position. So you keep doing like that, and then if by God you've gone a little too far and you need to get down a little faster, you can slip, and you can lose more of that and still have more oncoming air coming up under the bottom of the plane to push your way. See, most of your lift on an airplane is the air flying over the wings by the aerodynamics. Bernoulli's theorem,
right?
But sometimes you use just the oncoming of the fact that you're losing altitude and speed just by gravity because of the weight, and so that thing helps you. But when you're doing that, but you learn to do that,
and that feeling can be transferred from a plane like the Stearman to the.
Yeah, the feeling can be, if you're a good pilot, the feeling is the same. Well, it's different, but it's the same because you feel it in your body. You can feel when the plane is just about ready to quit, or you can feel it gets to be the point when I'm sure with now when you're flying high-powered jet aircraft, when you're making a turn and you're pulling all those G's, you can feel that when you're pulling too many or not enough and things like. We never had that problem in flying these kinds of airplanes, except when we're doing loops and power stalls and stuff like that. You don't ever feel G's on your body very much. But so, of course, the flying of the Yellow Peril was interesting. The other thing, it was in Memphis, Tennessee, and you think, well, that's way down south. But this was all during the winter. See, this was from November to April. And you're out, the Yellow Peril is out in the open. You don't have a canopy
cockpit,
or anything. So you had all this warm clothing and gloves and all that kind of thing. And God, you'd be flying at high elevation. In fact, we had some flights training to go into high elevation, as high as the airplane would go. Gee, you'd almost freeze to death, you know. So, and it was really, really tough duty. And God, when you get off, you almost couldn't move your legs because you were so cold and stuff like that. But it was great, and it was great flying. So you learned how to do that. So that lasted 105 hours of actual flying time. And then on April 7th, 45, started 4.5 months of flight training in a 600 horsepower Pratt & Whitney powered SNJ-5. And the single wing trainer was capable of almost any maneuver of any combat plane in service at that time. It was very maneuverable, very powerful given its weight and wingspan and that kind of thing. The usual training and practice and then lots of formation flying and all these things. Aerobatics, inverted spins we had to do. Couldn't do those many times in a Yellow Peril because you're upside down and nothing to hold you if your gear broke or anything like that. So you didn't do much inverted, but you did a lot of it in the SNJs. And the other thing we had to do, which was simulated carrier landings and takeoffs, and those are the ones where they had guys on the ground doing the same thing. And then we had to practice firing the guns at a sleeve that was towed by another aircraft. Great big piece of cloth sleeve was the target. And you would fire at that after coming at it from high elevation, low elevation, coming opposite direction, all of that kind of thing. And gosh, I almost forgot about this. I didn't write it down. I wasn't involved in the thing. That's why I don't remember it as vividly. But two of the guys in my battalion or squadron shot down their instructor, the guy that was pulling the sleeve one time, because he was telling them that what he wanted them to do, and they did it so meticulously, he'd forgotten that in one part of that, he was going to be right in their line of fire. And so it didn't kill him, it hurt his airplane, it knocked out the engine. He had to go and crash land the airplane in the ocean. He bailed out and let the plane go down. And,
how much longer are we going to be? Because I've got to go to the ladies.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Is it?
Do you know where?
Downstairs.
Downstairs.
Right through the gates.
Okay.
Right between the hangars.
All right. Thank you.
So, but then the other thing is so that we would understand and get the training necessary, each of us had to pull the target sometimes. So that we would have respect for the fact that these guys not only would have to fire at that target, but they had to do it in such a way that we
ensure the safety of the
safety of the
tow plane.
gun.
Yes.
And then the other thing that we did, a lot of physical training, lots of classroom work on a daily basis, and we flew almost every day. And then we spent a lot of time in the link trainers, and now they would probably call them reality trainers, but that's what they were. And then the other thing is that we did a lot of training with celestial navigation, because of course the other major difference between Army, even Marine pilots, is they always have land markers to look at when they're flying and navigating. And basically Navy pilots don't. They just have the sun, the moon, stars, and things like that to train, to guide them where they want to go. So you do a lot of navigational training, radio directionals, and things like that. So we did quite a lot of that during the time at intermediate flight training. And then that included 180 hours of actual flying time. And then,
now, is this the aircraft you flew there?
No, this I think this is an SBD.
Okay.
Yeah, SNJ. I think I have a picture of them somewhere here. Then the really thing that really shook us up was the nuclear bomb was dropped on Hiroshima on August the 6th, 1945. And we didn't finish training until August 23rd at intermediate flight training. And so the entire attitude of the naval commanders was changed after that historical event. And it had literally was determined that the war was over, because then they dropped the bomb on Nagasaki 3 days later, and Japan was gone. And so we kind of knew, and we're almost told, the war's over. We're going to go on with your training, they told us, but don't be too surprised.
Now, at this point, you had not yet done an actual carrier landing.
No, had not.
Okay.
So although it was pretty clear the war was over, on August the 24th, which was just, see, this happened on the 6th. It was that, not even a month later. We started training in the 1,000 horsepower Wright SBD-5, which was the dive bomber and torpedo plane. That was used almost entirely in my final days of training. On one occasion, I flew to the Naval Air Station in Glenview, Illinois, to practice carrier landings and takeoffs on the Wolverine. And I remembered the Wolverine, of course, because that's the name of the football team at the University of Michigan.
Yes.
They are the Wolverines.
As a graduate of Ohio State, we are painfully aware of that.
Right. So you went to Ohio State.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have our grudge match every
Yes,
year.
I wasn't going to bring that up.
Yeah, but I live with that too. I love it. It was always amazed me that University of Michigan Stadium is the largest football stadium in the United States. Yeah. And I always thought, well, the Rose Bowl or someplace else, but no.
Yeah.
At any rate,
the Wolverine, though, is an interesting.
It was really interesting because.
Tell us, first of all, what it was and where it is.
Well, it's on Lake Michigan, and near Glenview Naval Air Station. And the Wolverine was one of two commercial vessels that the Navy decided to convert into a trainer for carrier flights.
They were actually passenger.
They were passenger
vessels. One was a side wheel.
The Wolverine was a side wheel thing, and because of its side wheel, it was constructed so it was pretty easy to just level the flight deck part and still not have any great vertical thing that was going to interfere with takeoffs and landing or the power of the ship to develop enough speed to develop what it needed to do for landings and move around in the lake and stuff like that, to be able to change directions and do all it needed to do.
So your first aircraft carrier landing was actually on a quote aircraft carrier on Lake Michigan.
That's right.
Your only
My only
carrier landing.
And most carrier landing and takeoff qualifications required a minimum of 8 landings and takeoffs. Ours didn't, because they didn't keep us there long enough. Because the war was over, and they said they had made up their minds they wanted this certain group of us to be able to finish training and become qualified and designated as naval aviators. And which we were kind of lucky. We had earned it, I guess, by the way we had conducted ourselves during our training.
When did you get your wings, by the way? I forgot to ask that.
September 16th, 1945.
Okay.
I was declared a naval aviator with the rank of ensign and awarded my wings. And I was going to bring my wings to show you, but I don't have them anymore. I think I gave them.
I know what you did with them.
Gave them to my daughter,
You
didn't I?
gave them to Jill when she graduated from being a flight attendant.
Oh, that's right. My daughter, my younger daughter, was a flight attendant for Continental Airlines, Western Airlines. And when she graduated from that school, I gave her my wings. But at any rate, I got them on September the 15th. And the next day, our squadron had to fly our planes to Newport, Arkansas. It's near Little Rock, because of the threat of a huge hurricane that looked like it was going to devastate a lot of the facilities at Pensacola and the planes, our squadron of planes. And so we flew to Newport, Arkansas, and these are SBDs, this plane. And we landed up there and spent, I think it was 2 days waiting for the hurricane to get away, and took them back. And then on October the 19th and 20th, I flew from Pensacola to Corpus Christi, and picked up an F-6F, a fighter plane, which I had only checked out in. And then I flew it from Corpus Christi to Houston, back to Pensacola. That was my last flight as on duty naval aviator, because on October the 22nd of 1945, I was assigned to inactive duty as a reserve pilot and told to go home.
Before we leave this, though, describe your first carrier landing.
Well, I think in my first carrier landing, I confirmed the statement that all carrier landings are just controlled crashes. Because even though you had all that training and you're totally confident the way you fly and all that kind of thing, there's just something about, see, when you're landing on a field, you know that even though you're doing everything right, if you make a mistake and you have to go flying off the end, you got miles of hayfield or something else to go in here, and you don't have to worry about the width, because there's miles on each side of you. But when you come on this last turn, all carrier landing turns, wherever they are, is just a complete 360-degree turn. You don't come in from a long way off in the back or anything. You come and you turn around like that, and you do all of this so you can see everything all the time. And then all of a sudden you straighten out, you pull up your nose, and you look at the landing signal officer, because lots of times when your nose is up like that, you can't really see the surface you're going to land on. And here's this guy with the paddles, and he's telling you by what he does, whether your left wing is low or your right wing is low, or you're going too fast or you're going too slow. And so you have to turn over your mind to him and say, do what he tells you. Discipline.
Yeah.
And so I was nervous. I was really nervous.
Now you took off from Glenview.
Yeah, took off from Glenview Naval Air Station and flew out to. They directed us where to go and what the landmarks were to go. And then,
Over Chicago, essentially.
more or less, we were over just the edge of Chicago. It was north of Chicago, and they keep saying in that thing there that they got used to it, and they showed the city streets of Chicago and all that kind of thing. But most of the time, it wasn't really quite that close. You had to be pretty close to Glenview to see people landing and taking off. From far away, you could, I guess, but it was kind of nerve-wracking. But the truth is, I did what it was well. The planes were beautifully equipped. The Wolverine was beautiful, and the guys that were operating the cables, so they would come up at the right time. Your wheels would go over, and your landing hooks would grab that cable. And so that's what we did, and it worked out really well. I got to the point where in my third or fourth landing, it was fun because it was just exciting to say. Yeah,
Over how many days did?
I think we were there. I think we were there only 5 days, and I think we did 5 landings in 5 days, but on at least one and maybe 2 of these days we didn't do landings. We did other training, and then we did 2 landings. I know on one day, and I think 1 or 2 on the other. It was happened so fast, and we already knew that we were going back to Pensacola and they were going home. That we didn't really focus on it too much, except just that you have to focus when you're flying an airplane. You know, no matter. I learned so much respect for flying airplanes that even after the war and then the rest of my career, even though I did a little bit of flying when I was living in Denver, just to fly in, say I'd flown in the mountains and do all that. I just didn't ever, because I didn't fly in after I got out of the reserves, I still flew in the reserves. We'll talk about that in a minute if you want to. I don't know how much more of
I
this
want to take a minute and focus on that picture. Take the pencil if you want, or use your finger, whatever you're comfortable with. Just describe a little bit about that aircraft as it relates to what you were doing.
Well, basically, as you can see, the wings are lower. They're on the bottom of the plane, and that gives it great stability and great flyability, and it's great maneuverability. The other thing the wings do is make it difficult to see down like this, which you kind of feel like you need to when you're landing, and you can't really do that. So that's why you have to look out at this angle, and you can see the landing signal officer. This plane also carried guns they were wing located about like this.
Were they 50 caliber?
They were 50 caliber, and they could be fired. They fired straight ahead, and you had to aim the airplane. They might have come in a little bit, but they were outside the rotation of the propellers.
What was their convergence? Do you know?
I don't really know. They weren't real narrow. They had to give you a fairly large space so that if you didn't hit the target dead on, you still hit it.
Yeah. Okay.
Then in the back seat, in most of them, was the gunner, and he had a 50 caliber machine gun type thing, military fly, which he could fire off in almost any route. But there were positions that he could not fire, so that the shots could never hit the tail in any way. So he could fire out this way on oncoming vessels, or if you were strafing something on the ground or something of that nature. Then this plane was also used. I flew in training, I think, 2 or 3 dive bombing missions where it had bombs under here, and you flew a dive bomber, and you would fly almost vertically down and launch the bomb and then pull up as it went out. And this guy then became the guy that determined by radio control and other visual things that were seen. He would be the one that decided when you released the bomb.
Essentially the bombardier.
He was the bombardier in that case.
And that seat was usually not occupied in your training flights.
Yeah, that's right. It was almost never. The only time it was ever occupied during training was when your instructor, and there were controls back here also, always, in case something happened to the pilot, the gunner or the bombardier could take over if he had to.
Did you like that aircraft? It was.
Yes, I loved it. It was very maneuverable, very sturdy, very stable. It was comfortable. It wasn't quite what you kind of hoped that you were going to get into, like a fighter plane or something like that. But for what it was done and for training, it was really very good. It made you feel good, made you feel comfortable. It responded to your controls extremely well.